I never believed that a single knock on the door could erase 5 years of carefully built silence. Yet on a cold October evening, just as the rain tapped against my apartment windows and I was finishing another lonely dinner, 3 soft knocks echoed through the hallway. They weren't hurried or demanding. They were hesitant, almost afraid. When I opened the door, time stopped. Standing there was Emma. The woman I had loved with everything I had. The woman who had disappeared without a goodbye, leaving nothing behind except an empty apartment, unanswered messages, and a broken heart I had spent years trying to repair. But she wasn't alone. Wrapped in a pale blue blanket against her chest was a tiny baby, sleeping peacefully with rosy cheeks and tiny fingers curled into a fist. Emma looked different. Her once bright smile had faded into exhaustion. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and her clothes were damp from the rain. Yet those familiar green eyes still carried the warmth I remembered, mixed now with fear and regret. "Can I come in?" she whispered. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Every memory crashed into me at once, the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, the night she vanished without explanation. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Another part wanted to pull her into my arms and pretend those lost years had never happened. Instead, I stepped aside. She entered quietly, rocking the baby gently while looking around the apartment as though she were visiting a place from another lifetime. "I know I don't deserve your kindness," she began, her voice trembling. But I didn't know where else to go. I made her a cup of tea while she settled onto the couch. The baby stirred briefly before falling asleep again. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Why did you leave?" Emma lowered her head. "My father found out about us," she said softly. "He had already arranged a marriage with the son of one of his business partners. When I refused, he threatened to destroy your career. He promised you'd never find work again." I stared at her in disbelief. "So you left, without even telling me?" Tears filled her eyes. "I thought losing me would hurt less than losing your future." I laughed bitterly. "You made that decision for both of us." She nodded slowly. "I know. It was the biggest mistake of my life." Silence filled the room except for the soft breathing of the baby. Then she looked up at me. "I married him." The word struck harder than I expected. But he wasn't the man everyone believed he was. He became controlling, cruel. When our daughter was born, everything became worse. 2 months ago, he died in a car accident. She gently kissed the baby's forehead. "I've spent every day wondering whether I should come here." I looked at the little girl sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm surrounding her. "What's her name?" I asked. "Lily." She smiled for the first time. "I named her after the flower you used to leave on my doorstep every Friday." I had forgotten those flowers. She never had. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed the two of us laughing in front of an old carnival, arms wrapped around each other, believing life would always be that simple. "I carried this every day," she whispered. "I never stopped loving you." The anger I'd carried for years suddenly felt heavier than it ever had. I realized that while I had been mourning someone who chose to leave, she had been surviving a life she never wanted. No apology could return those lost years. No explanation could erase the pain. But as Lily suddenly opened her tiny eyes and reached toward me with one impossibly small hand, something inside me softened. Carefully, I took her into my arms. She looked at me for a moment before breaking into the sweetest smile I'd ever seen. Emma watched through quiet tears. "I didn't come here asking you to be her father," she said. "I only wanted you to know the truth, and maybe forgive me someday." I looked from the little girl to the woman I had once planned to spend my life with. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in years, a beam of evening sunlight slipped through the clouds, filling the room with golden light. I can't promise everything will go back to the way it was, I said gently. But maybe. I smiled at Lily as she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. We can stop living in the past and start writing a different future. Emma's tears turned into a hopeful smile. Sometimes life doesn't give us the ending we expected. Sometimes it gives us another chance. Arriving quietly, with 3 gentle knocks, and a baby in her arms, the following morning felt strangely unfamiliar. For years, my apartment had echoed with nothing but silence and routine. Now, tiny cries drifted from the living room where Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted beyond words. Lily stirred in her blanket, rubbing her little eyes before letting out a soft whimper. I carefully picked her up, unsure of what I was doing. She stared at me with curious blue eyes that seemed far too wise for a 6-month-old. Instead of crying, she simply wrapped both tiny hands around my thumb and smiled. You already trust people too easily, I whispered. Emma woke to the sound of my voice. For a brief moment she looked confused, as if expecting to wake somewhere else. Then she saw Lily in my arms and her expression softened. I haven't seen her smile like that around anyone new, she admitted. Maybe she knows good people when she sees them. Emma lowered her eyes. I wish I'd trusted you the way she does. We spent breakfast speaking cautiously, almost like strangers learning each other again. There were awkward pauses, memories neither of us knew how to touch, and questions that still had painful answers. Finally, I asked the one question that had kept me awake all night. If your husband is gone, why come now? Emma folded her hands together. Because someone found us. I frowned. My father. The room suddenly felt colder. He never accepted that I left his family after my husband's funeral. He wants custody of Lily. Custody? He believes she's the only heir to the family's fortune. He doesn't care about raising her. He only cares about protecting the family name. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So he threatened you? Emma nodded. He said if I refused, he'd make sure no lawyer, no court, no friend would stand beside me. And that's why you came here? You were the only person who ever protected me without asking for anything in return. Before I could answer, someone knocked loudly at the apartment door. This time, the knock wasn't gentle. It was demanding. 3 men in expensive suits stood outside. Behind them waited a black luxury sedan. The oldest man stepped forward. Miss Emma Carter, he said coldly. Your father requests your immediate return. Emma instinctively held Lily tighter. I'm not going. The man glanced toward me. And you must be Daniel. I am. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside were legal documents. If Miss Carter refuses to cooperate, court proceedings will begin tomorrow morning. Emma's hands trembled. They've already started. The man leaned closer. Mr. Carter also asked me to remind you that running away didn't work the first time. Without another word, they walked away. Emma collapsed into a chair. I can't fight him, she whispered. He owns half the city's law firms. I looked through the papers carefully. Most people would have panicked. Instead, something caught my attention. One document listed Lily's trust fund. Another listed Emma as the sole legal guardian. There was no court order. No custody approval. Only threats disguised as legal paperwork. They're bluffing. Emma looked up. What? They're trying to scare you into giving up voluntarily. You're sure? I'm sure enough to call a lawyer. She stared at me, hope slowly replacing fear. You'd really help me after everything? I smiled sadly. You made one terrible decision 5 years ago. So did I. She looked confused. I gave up looking for you too soon. For the first time since she'd returned, Emma reached across the table and held my hand. Neither of us spoke. Words weren't enough. That afternoon, I contacted an old college friend who had become one of the city's most respected family attorneys. After reviewing every document, he confirmed exactly what I suspected. "They don't have a case," he said. "They're relying on intimidation." Emma burst into tears, not from fear this time, but from relief. For months she'd believed she was powerless. Now, for the first time, someone was standing beside her instead of controlling her. As evening arrived, Lily crawled clumsily across the carpet toward me, laughing as she reached my feet. I lifted her into the air, and her laughter filled every corner of the apartment. Emma watched quietly. "I almost forgot what happiness sounded like," she whispered. I looked at both of them. The woman I'd never stopped loving. The little girl who had somehow brought us back together. Whatever battle waited ahead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. 5 years ago, I had lost the love of my life because we faced our problems alone. This time, no one was going to face them alone. A week later, the courtroom was packed. Emma sat beside me, nervously twisting the silver ring she wore on a chain around her neck. Lily slept peacefully in a stroller, completely unaware that her future was about to be decided by strangers in black robes. Across the room sat Richard Carter, Emma's father. 5 years hadn't softened him. His tailored suit, confident posture, and cold expression made him look more like a businessman closing a deal than a grandfather fighting for his granddaughter. When the hearing began, his attorney painted Emma as an unstable widow who couldn't provide a secure future for her child. Then he pointed toward me. "And this man is simply an old romantic attachment with no legal connection to the child." Emma's hands began shaking. I gently squeezed them. "It's okay," I whispered. Our attorney stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit additional evidence." A large folder was placed before the judge. Inside were dozens of documents. Medical reports showing bruises Emma had hidden during her marriage. Police complaints filed by neighbors who had heard violent arguments. Bank statements proving Richard Carter had secretly controlled every account belonging to his daughter. Most importantly, a series of emails. Emails from 5 years earlier. The courtroom became silent as the judge read them. One message from Richard read, "Leave Daniel tonight, or I'll make sure he never works again." Another read, "You'll marry the man I chose. Love doesn't matter. Family reputation does." Emma closed her eyes. For years, those words had haunted her. Now everyone could finally see the truth. Richard's confidence disappeared. His lawyer quickly tried to object, but the judge silenced him. Our attorney spoke calmly. "This case isn't about protecting Lily. It's about control." Richard suddenly stood. "I only wanted what was best for my family." Emma slowly rose to her feet. "For years, you convinced me that obedience was love." She looked directly into her father's eyes. "But love doesn't threaten. It doesn't manipulate. And it certainly doesn't destroy the people it's supposed to protect." No one in the courtroom moved. Even Richard couldn't answer. After a brief recess, the judge returned with the decision. The court finds no legal basis for removing Lily from her mother's custody. He paused. Furthermore, evidence presented today demonstrates a long history of coercion and intimidation by Mr. Richard Carter. He looked toward Emma. "You and your daughter are free to live your lives without interference." The gavel struck. It was over. Emma broke down in tears. Not tears of sadness. Tears of freedom. Outside the courthouse, sunlight poured across the steps as reporters surrounded Richard, asking questions he could no longer avoid. For once, power couldn't protect him. Weeks passed. Life slowly became ordinary. Emma found work as an art teacher at a local community center. I returned to my architecture firm. Lily quickly decided that my shoulders were the best place in the world to watch cartoons. One Saturday afternoon, we visited the same old carnival where Emma and I had taken that faded photograph years ago. Most of the rides had changed. But the flower stand was still there. Without saying a word, I bought a single white lily. Emma laughed softly. You remembered. I never forgot. We walked together while Lily clapped happily from her stroller. When we reached the Ferris wheel, I stopped. My heart pounded harder than it ever had. I reached into my jacket pocket. Emma looked surprised. I bought this ring 6 years ago, I admitted. I planned to give it to you before everything fell apart. She covered her mouth. I carried it all this time. I knelt on one knee. Emma. We lost 5 years. We can't get them back. But we still have tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day we're lucky enough to share. She was already crying before I finished. Will you marry me? She laughed through her tears. I've been waiting 5 years to say yes. People around us began clapping as I slipped the ring onto her finger. At that exact moment, little Lily squealed with excitement and reached both hands toward us. Emma lifted her into her arms, and together we embraced beneath the evening sky. 6 months later, we were married in a quiet garden surrounded by close friends instead of expensive guests. No grand speeches. No family politics. Just love. As the ceremony ended, Lily toddled across the grass in a tiny white dress, laughing as she ran into my arms. Without hesitation, I lifted her high above my head. She giggled before wrapping her tiny arms around my neck. Dada. The word came out naturally. No one had taught her. No one had asked her to say it. She simply chose it. Emma smiled through tears that sparkled in the sunlight. Years ago, I thought I'd lost the woman I loved forever. Instead, fate brought her back with a little girl in her arms, a child who wasn't born into my life but grew into my heart. Sometimes, the happiest families aren't the ones that begin perfectly. They're the ones that survive heartbreak, choose forgiveness, and discover that love is strongest when it's given a second chance. The end.